Yes, they are.
Great. If you have any questions either before or during the program, if you can please write them in the Q&A button, which is 2 word bubbles on top of each other. I'll be able to see them there. Yes, if you're wondering, the video is off and you are all muted as attendees. So feel free to talk during the meeting, or if you're eating something, that's fine. The panelists will not be interrupted. Okay, we're going to get started in just a minute again, and I'll repeat this in just a minute. Also, if you have any questions before or during the program, feel free to use that Q&A button. It's 2 word bubbles on top of each other. I'll be able to see all your questions here, and I will choose some of them at the end to ask our panelists also. It is now 6 p.m. Eastern time. I know we have Girl Scouts from all over the country joining us today, which I'm so excited about. Well, we here in the Washington, D.C. area, it's 6 p.m., so we can get started. So first things first, welcome Girl Scouts and good evening. We are so excited to have you here with us to learn about endangered species and to celebrate some of the amazing work that's been done to protect them. My name is Emily Mercurio. I'm a program specialist at Girl Scouts Nation's Capital. Many of you are in our council. We serve the Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia area. But I know that we have girls from across the country here tonight. So if you don't know, at Girl Scouts Nation's Capital, we have a very special patch program that we're very proud of, which is all about endangered species. And today, you're not just going to be learning about endangered species, you're actually going to complete 2 steps for the patch program also. So the 5 steps on the screen are all of the steps for earning the endangered species patch. If you're a Daisy, Brownie, or Junior, then you only have to complete steps 1 to 3 to earn the endangered species patch. If you're a Cadet, Senior, or Ambassador, you have to complete all 5 steps. And tonight, we're actually going to complete steps 1 and 2. We're going to learn about the endangered and threatened species on Earth and the Endangered Species Act, and we're going to investigate 2 endangered species. We're actually going to investigate more than 2, but that's just a little bonus. That means that daisies, brownies, and juniors, all you have to do to earn your patch is make a creative project inspired by endangered species. If you're a cadet, senior, and ambassador, you have to do that, plus visit a local environmental organization and present what you learned about endangered species to someone else. If you are a caregiver or otherwise responsible for buying the patch, I'll note that they are available not just in our local Girl Scouts Nation's Capital shops, but also on girlscoutshop.com. So they are available nationwide. So first things first, why are we even doing this today? Well, every year on the third Friday in May, and that's a week from tomorrow, thousands of people all around the world participate in Endangered Species Day by celebrating, learning about, and taking action to protect threatened and endangered species. After all the things you learned this evening, we hope that you'll all do something to celebrate and protect endangered species to recognize Endangered Species Day next week. Now, if you don't know, endangered species are species of animals or plants that are at serious risk of extinction, which is when a whole species dies out. Many species are only endangered because of human actions like hunting and fishing too much and destroying habitats to create new buildings or roads, polluting the environment. These are all serious problems for our species on Earth. So just a quick poll to get us started. How many endangered species do you guys think that there are on Earth? You should have a poll up on your screen right now. Oh, I see some answers coming in. Lots of answers coming in very quickly. Once I have a few more, I will display the answers in real time, but I am seeing the numbers bounce all around my screen right now. Okay, I'm gonna hit end poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. End poll and share results. So the majority of you, 38%, think that there are 16,300 endangered species on Earth, and unfortunately, you are right. The largest number on this list is the correct answer, because over 16,300 species are endangered, and beyond that, at least 38,500 species are threatened, meaning that even if they're not endangered right now, if we don't change anything, they might be endangered soon. Just in the US, there's over 1,300 endangered or threatened species. One of the most important ways that people have taken action to protect endangered species was the creation of the Endangered Species Act, which is now a law. The Endangered Species Act makes it illegal for people to harm, kill, buy, or sell plants or animals that are endangered. And that's amazing. It has done so much to help endangered species, but there's a lot more to be done. We're going to learn about some endangered species today, and we are lucky enough to be joined by some experts from 2 organizations that are on the forefront of the fight to protect the planet: the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and the National Fish and Wildlife Service, which we'll call FWS. Both of these organizations are part of our government. That means they're both federal agencies, and they both play a big part in the fight to protect endangered species. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Kim, who is here from the Fish and Wildlife Service. Kim, you can begin to share your screen and tell us about your species.
Okay. Yikes. Right. Share screen. Share screen. How does that look?
That looks great.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. I'm Ranger Kim, and I'm really excited to be participating tonight. I was a Girl Scout when I was a kid, and actually I'm still a Girl Scout. I'm a lifetime member, and I'm a troop leader. And my favorite part of Girl Scouts was going camping with my friends. I loved all the outdoor stuff. I played outside all the time when I was a kid, but the only time I went camping was with Girl Scouts. And I just really loved animals and plants and nature and outdoors. And so I went to college to study wildlife, and then I became a park ranger. Now I work at Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, which is in Florida. It's on the east coast of Florida on the Atlantic side. And we have loads of endangered species here. We have 14 different ones. And that's because of where we are, where a lot of different habitats meet together. And people know about some of them that are in the news, like sea turtles and manatees. In this picture here, you can see that I'm showing a little tiny baby gopher tortoise, which is one of our threatened species. But tonight I want to talk about one that people almost never see or hear about, and that's the southeast beach mouse. And the beach mouse, as you can see, is adorable, first of all. It's a tiny little guy. He only weighs about 13 grams. That's about the same as 2 Thin Mint cookies. So really small. Of course, the females can weigh a little bit more if they're pregnant, but overall, they're pretty tiny. They're tan or light gray on top and white on the bottom because they live near the beach. And so they have to be camouflaged and blend in with the color of the sand. The light colors also help them to not be quite so hot. If you've ever been to the beach and you know you got to keep your flip-flops on until you get through the hot sand, and you know, that's where the beach mice live, is right on that hot sand. So they have really big ears. That also helps to try and keep them cool. When the blood goes through their ears, it can cool. It can be cooled by the air. So if it's really hot inside their body, when it goes through their ears, which are really thin, the blood cools down and helps cool them down. It has really big eyes, and that's because it's nocturnal, and those big eyes help it to see in the dark. Its habitat, like I mentioned, and like you could probably guess, is it's near the beach, but it's not actually on the beach. It's in the dunes, and especially on the back side of the dunes. So there's also an area behind the dunes called the Florida Scrub, which is a sandy, wide open kind of place too. So that's its space. Older girls know habitat is food, water, shelter, space. So its space is in the dunes and in the scrub behind the dunes. For shelter, it digs a burrow in the ground, and it usually stays in there all day where it's nice and cool. It's cooler down under the ground than it is up in the hot sun, where it's not a very shady place. As you can see from this picture, there's a lot of open sand. They get most of their water from the plants that they eat. Even though we're on Merritt Island, which is an island, and there's water, it's not really drinkable water, it's kind of salty. So even though you see water in the background in this picture, that's not really drinkable water. And the mouse gets most of its moisture from the food that it eats. And it's an omnivore, so it eats plants and animals. Mostly it eats the sea oats, which grow on the dunes and have little oat-like seeds that it can eat. It eats fruits. It will nibble on cactus fruits and other seeds it can find. And it might eat a bug once in a while too. That's what makes it an omnivore. There's a bunch of different kinds of beach mice, and all of them are protected. In Florida, there are 8 different ones, and ours is the one with the blue, dark blue or black dot there. That's, nope, sorry, that's wrong. Ours is below the dark blue or black dot, right between that red dot and that dark dot. That little island, that's Merritt Island that you see right there. That's the refuge. And so we're the southeast beach mouse. But all the different kinds of beach mice are pretty similar, and they're all protected. So why is the southeast beach mouse endangered? Well, its biggest threat is from development. If you've ever been to the beach and you've stayed at a hotel that's right on the beach, or you've gone to the kind of beach that has ice cream shops, boardwalks, t-shirt shops, all that fun shopping things that are right there, right behind the beach, usually that means there's not any habitat behind the dunes, or the habitat that's behind the dunes is people habitat. Right? So we're back there. We're back there behind the dunes, staying in the hotel, eating some beachy junk food, you know, on vacation. And we are where the beach mouse used to be. And so that's the #1 reason why they're are losing their habitat, is because people have developed the dune area. Tropical storms and hurricanes aren't very good for them either. When we have a hurricane, big waves can come and flatten the dunes. And a lot of times their little burrows are right behind the dunes. And so they get, when the dune gets flattened, they get buried. And of course, you may have heard that with climate change, hurricanes are getting bigger and bigger, and big hurricanes can have bigger waves and it can really flatten out the dunes. So there's two different kinds of things that are really impacting the beach mice, but both of them really are things that people do, right? We are the ones who build on the dunes, and we are the ones who contribute to climate change. This is a map that shows the range of where they used to be. You can see the dark green area is where the mice live now, is all the way over there on the left, which is not a lot of area. It's mostly the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, and also the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And then right out on the beach is the Canaveral National Seashore. So it's really limited to lands that nobody has homes on now. All these areas, the Space Force Station, that's where we launch rockets from. The National Seashore, that's a beach that doesn't have any buildings or hotels on it. And of course, the National Wildlife Refuge is just all habitat. So these are the places where it lives now, but if it's going to be really successful and recover and not be endangered anymore, it needs to expand back into its historic range, which you can see is the middle map. You can see all the places it used to live. And then perhaps if we were to do some reintroduction, which is when the biologists take some mice off of the beach and put them in other suitable habitat, it might be able to expand to more places. So why do we care about a tiny little mouse? Well, I like it because it's cute, but what are some other reasons why we should care about the mouse? One is it has an important role to play in the habitat it lives in. When it digs its burrows, it helps air to get to the roots of plants. And that's important. Aerating the soil helps all the plants grow. Two, it eats seeds. So when it's scurrying around through all the plants looking for food, sometimes seeds stick to their fur, just like they stick to your socks. And then the mouse transports them to other locations. Or if they're tiny seeds, the mouse might eat them, and then they get transported inside the mouse's tummy and they come out when it poops. So it helps to spread the seeds around. And it just helps encourage a healthy food chain. It eats a lot of different things, and it is eaten by a lot of different things too. It's eaten by snakes and hawks and foxes, all the things that live in the scrub habitat with it. So it's an important part of that food chain out there in the scrub in the area behind the dunes. So how can we help this mouse get off of the endangered species list? Well, we need to have populations that aren't just here on Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge. We need to have several different populations, maybe as many as 5 different places where they live. In case a big hurricane hits Merritt Island and flattens all the dunes, we need to have some mice that aren't living on Merritt Island, maybe on the mainland where they're protected from the hurricanes. And just making sure that there are enough of them so that if something happens, like if they all get sick, maybe a disease hits one population, then that whole population gets sick and dies off. If we have more than one, then the species won't be in trouble as a whole species. They're doing really great here on Merritt Island. And actually we've kind of rolled back how much effort we put into monitoring them, and we don't go out and count them every year now. We only count them only once every 5 years, because our populations are doing really great here on the National Seashore, on the Space Center, and on the National Wildlife Refuge. So what can you do to help us? Well, if you ever get a chance to go to the beach, then you have to be careful not to be walking up in the dunes. Don't play in the dunes. You know, there are hills and you can looks like it might be fun to slide down them, but really you need to stay out of the dunes and just use the crossovers when you're headed to the beach. Don't litter, because litter can attract predators to come into their habitat. And if a fox is out on the beach because it's learned that there's food out there, it could also discover that there are mice out there that it can eat. If it's a dog beach and you're allowed to bring your dog, please still keep it on a leash on the dog beach, because we don't want the dogs running all through the dunes and disturbing the mouse's habitat. Same if you live near the coast, keep your cat indoors, because cats, of course, hunt mice, right? And they don't know the difference. Your cat doesn't know the difference between an endangered mouse and not an endangered mouse. So we need to keep cats on a leash so that they won't harm wildlife. Turning out lights on the coast is important. Even if you're there as a visitor at your hotel or at a cottage, you could make sure that the lights are out, because if the lights are on, predators can see the mice and then they'll get eaten at night when they're out trying to find some food. And just be supportive of conservation. Support your coastal parks, support your national wildlife refuges, support your national parks and the work that they do. And that will help not just the beach mouse, but all the endangered species that live on public lands. Do we have time for questions, Emily?
We absolutely do. I already have some banked up for you here. I'm going to take over the screen share just to make sure that everyone can see how to ask those questions though. So if you haven't found it already, there is this Q&A button. I have it circled in yellow at the bottom here, which will let you type a question that I can see. I'm going to then select a few of them to ask to Kim. So I can start right off with some of the ones that were asked during your presentation. So you said that the beach mice, or the southeastern mouse, it has its den on the beach. What happens when the tide comes in? Do their dens get flooded?
Oh, that's a really good question. They don't live that close to the water. They live on the back side of the dune, not on the water side of the dune. So over the top of the dune and on the back side. And the dune protects them from floods and tides if it's not a big storm.
It's a good adaptation. Make your den in a safe place. I have a couple questions around a similar topic, so I'll make them into one question about how you find these mice if you're trying to do work on conservation and they're endangered. Isn't it really hard to find them on the beach?
That's another good question. So we've been studying them for a long time, but the first thing that we do is we go to an area where that's the right kind of habitat where we think they might be, and then we leave food out for them. And, just like you catch a mouse at home, we put some snacks out for them, but we don't have a trap. They just will walk across an area of smooth sand and leave their tracks in there. And then we know that there are mice there that came. We can look at the tracks and know what kind of animal left them to come and get the food.
Great. Do we know how many of them are left?
I don't know the exact number. I'm sorry, I don't have that. But what we do is we do trap once every 5 years in a certain area, and then we do get a count by trapping. So we do have a good idea of how many there are. I just don't have the exact number.
Great. And one more question. Aside from, obviously, you said that things like development, building things like the Kennedy Space Force Center and other places impacts their environment, what are their natural predators?
Snakes are a big one. So in this habitat, there are several different kinds of snakes that live in the dune habitat, and they live in burrows and they can go down in the burrows. So I think they're one of the biggest ones that get them. But also there are foxes and coyotes that come out at night, but snakes are the trickiest because they can go down in their burrows. Good questions. Good questions.
Yes, thank you all for these great questions. We're going to move on to our next panelist and let Kim go to her own troop meeting because she's a troop leader. But thank you so much, Kim, for sharing all your valuable knowledge with us and for introducing us to this amazing species. So next up, we have Michele Atha from the Fish and Wildlife Service. I will share my screen to get those slides up right now. And Michele, if you'd like to take it away, I'm going to pin your video for everyone.
Hi, my name is Michele Atha, and I'm a lifetime member of the Girl Scouts as well. And I enjoy presenting, attending meetings, and definitely camping with my daughter's troop. I worked in a biomedical lab for 14 years before landing my dream job at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Conservation Training Center in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. I started my career 11 years ago. I currently support many courses at the training center, including watercraft safety or boating courses, mussel conservation, stream restoration, oil spill response, electrofishing, and river scuba diving. One of the highlights of my career was capturing the initial population of the candy darter for analysis under the Endangered Species Act. Look at this freshwater fish in the next slide. Isn't it beautiful? I thought only saltwater fresh were this attractive and colorful. With its vibrant teal, red, and orange, this is the candy darter, which is now listed as an endangered species. Did you know that there are freshwater mussels? Well, it's not all rainbows and sunshine for the candy darter or the freshwater mussels. However, never fear, because the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is here, and the Endangered Species Act is 99% successful. Let's take a look at the next slide. The North American freshwater mussels are critically imperiled. They generally require fish hosts in order to complete their life cycle. Freshwater mussels are some of the planet's most fascinating and underappreciated animals. They have beautiful, colorful shells. They're diverse with shapes and interesting adornments, including ridges, bumps, and spikes. They've earned common names such as the fuzzy pigtoe, the fluted elephant ear, the rabbit's foot, and the pimpleback. In the state of West Virginia alone, there are 29 endangered species and 1 threatened species of freshwater mussels. In the next slide, you'll see a diagram. These 2 species that I'm talking about have a unique relationship. The mussels depend upon the darter for its reproduction. So let's take a look at this video.
In the streams of Missouri lives the Lampsilus mussel, a simple animal with an extraordinary life cycle. To reach adulthood, its young must spend part of their lives inside a fish, the largemouth bass. To get there, the mussels must make physical contact, a difficult task, as mussels don't swim. But the bass has a weakness. It's a voracious predator of small fish, particularly darters. Even the slightest wriggle of a darter's tail will attract bass. Believe it or not, the fish on the mussel is an imitation, a perfect replica that will lure bass within striking range. The mussel can somehow sense approaching fish and wriggles its lure faster to entice them. If it gets the twitching just right, the remarkable likeness should do the rest. On impact, the mussel squirts its young into the bass's mouth. These snap shut on the gills, like spring-loaded traps. Here they stay, drawing blood from the fish, until several weeks later they drop off as tiny, fully formed mussels. Also a favorite prey of the bass are these striped shiners, and some
Okay. I just think that's really awesome how the mussels can mimic a minnow, and that's how they keep their reproduction cycle going. So in this slide, you'll see the beautifully colored candy darter and its natural range. They're found in 16 streams in West Virginia and only 4 streams in Virginia, and we sampled from the New River watershed. The candy darter was listed in 2018. It's a beautiful fish, only 2 to 3 inches long, that lives in fast-flowing streams. It aids in the life cycle of mussels, which we just saw, transporting their larvae. It helps keep the rivers clean because they're filter feeders. They prefer rocky bottoms. They can live up to 3 years. Primarily feed on small insects such as caddisfly and mayflies. In the next slide, you'll see the candy darter along with the variegated darter, and then the hybrid or combination of both species. The variegated darter seems to outcompete the candy darter for space, food, and mates. And you might ask, how did the variegated darter get introduced to the area of the candy darter? Well, an angler who was fishing released live bait. Transferring your live bait fish from one stream system to another has unintended consequences. It upset the natural fish community and has led to the decline of the candy darter. This video was produced at the National Conservation Training Center where I work. So let's watch this. It does a good description of the whole situation and features some people I work with.
Can you see this video okay?
I think it's coming up. Well, maybe not.
Can you see the video?
No. It's just a blank screen right now. There we go. Gotta love technology.
Fishermen have moved a very close relative into the drainage, and it's hybridizing with the candy darter and actually swamping out its genes and eliminating the candy darter. We're in here on the Greenbrier River drainage trying to collect as many candy darters as we're able to so that we can reintroduce them into areas outside the problem area.
So in the next slide, we'll see that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife tries to promote natural recovery of species.
Overhead.
So we actually don't start with breeding in captivity. As you see, we captured the natural population. The next step was genetically testing it. And then we relocated those to suitable habitat. Another thing that they've done is they've designated 368 miles of stream as critical habitat. And that's always a big part of saving species because we all need habitat or homes to live in. So let's talk about teamwork and partnerships in the next slide. As you can see, there were many different organizations involved with it. Some are governmental agencies, some are not, some state, some federal. But it takes a lot of people and a lot of work to recover a species. And we want to thank everybody listed here in this slide. So in the next slide, let's look at what we can do to help. The first thing we can do that I don't have listed here is drinking from a reusable water bottle. You know, it will save a lot of plastic. It also will release way less emissions into the air because you're not bottling it and transporting it. And guess what? When I was a kid, they didn't even sell bottled water. That's right. They didn't even sell it. We all drank from the tap, and we're here and everything's good. So maybe try to convince your parents and friends to stop buying bottled water. And that is a huge contribution that you all can make. And next thing you can do is clean up trash in your environment and litter, because where does all that end up? It ends up in our oceans. So it starts in the streams, and then it moves to the river, and then the oceans, right? And so then turtles can ingest it, and there's all kinds of negative impacts. Another thing you can do is use artificial bait while fishing, because as we see, releasing live bait can upset natural fish communities and may lead to the decline of some species. And convince your parents to reduce or eliminate the use of pesticides, insecticides, herbicides. All of that ends up in our waterways too. And just a quick note, that's what happened with the bald eagle. You know, it built up in the fish, and the eagles ate the fish, and in the eagles, it thinned their eggshells to the point of they became endangered because they were no longer having eaglets. So another thing you can do is plant trees and native wooded vegetation. And what you're learning today, teach it. Like I said, convince your parents and friends to not use water bottles and pesticides. So remember, animals can't speak or advocate themselves. We need to do that for them. Thank you, Girl Scouts. We can do this if we work together. Remember, teamwork makes dream work, and we can all control our choices and actions to help the planet and all the species living in it.
Thank you so much, Michele, for that amazing presentation. We're actually doing really well on time here. So I think if you wouldn't mind, we can take some questions for you right now, and then do separate questions for each panelist. So I already have a bunch in the chat or in the Q&A section, which is why I wanted to ask. And a lot of the questions are, why is it called a candy darter?
Well, I would assume, I don't know the actual answer, but because it has such, brilliant colors, what do we think of when we think of candy? We think of all those, bright colored things that we put in our mouth and eat. So I don't know for sure. That's just a guess, but because of those beautiful colors, that's what I would assume. But good question, girls.
That makes sense to me. We have a lot of questions also about that video about the mussels and the way that they grow inside of the bass. So to collect all of those questions, does that hurt the bass, and how do they get out once the little baby mussels are born?
Yeah, great question. So no, they don't hurt at all. The fish do not know that they're there, and they'll naturally drop off as they grow. So it's just kind of a natural process. When they're, larva is becoming bigger, they'll just drop into the bottom, and then they're born from there.
Great. So you mentioned that part of the reason that the candy darter is now endangered is not just things like humans polluting or fishing, but actually the mixing between the candy darter and the variegated darter. Can you explain a little more about how that contributes to the candy darter being endangered?
Well, basically, yeah, it's the genes now of the candy darter are not pure, right? So they're breeding with the variegated darter, which the variegated darter, as I said, they're out competing the candy darter. So it's a more dominant species than the candy darter is. But now they're mixing, so their genetics are different. So now their offspring are the hybrid. So because there's so many, and they're not, candy darters aren't mating with candy darters because there aren't as many of them, we're getting that hybrid species.
Interesting. We have one more good question here about electrofishing, which was mentioned in the Facebook video. What is that and how does it work?
Okay, great question. Yeah, so as you saw, we were kind of walking along the stream and we had like a pole with a ring on it. So there's different types. That was like a backpack shocker. If you saw when he was adjusting some of those numbers, that's called a backpack shocker. So somebody will wear it on their back and then you'll put a little bit of electrical current through the water and it basically stuns the fish temporarily. And that's what they were saying in the video. You want the right settings so you're not killing them in the process, you're just stunning them temporarily. And so we'll use that for things like collecting fish, doing fish surveys, and things of that nature. And that was Dr. Alan Temple, and he's taught that all over the world. So it's something that, you know, he went to Taos recently, Asia, he's been to Australia, and he teaches the science behind it and the conduct. You have to bring a couple things into it, like conductivity and, you know, the rates, as you saw in the video. But it's really done. You had to get permits and do it the proper way. But it's a good technique that biologists can use to definitely do fish sampling. Great questions, girls.
I'll do one more question just because I've seen it about 20 times in our Q&A here.
Okay.
Do you know why the candy darter is so colorful?
I don't. That's a great question. You know, because you would almost think, is it really blending in? You know, because when you think of animals, you want them to blend in with their surroundings. And, you know, maybe there's some river rock and some cobble, but geez, that bright. I've never seen it, you know, that bright. But yeah, I mean, you know, you think of bright, you think of the saltwater fish. So it's pretty neat to know that there's some really colorful and vibrant freshwater fish as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for these amazing questions, girls, and for your fantastic answers, Michele. I am now pleased to welcome our final speaker this evening, Melissa Neuman, who is joining us from NOAA. We'll pin you here, Melissa, and you are free to share your screen.
Thank you. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, although we are seeing the whole PowerPoint window rather than just the slide.
I'm going to go to slideshow view right now. Okay, are we good, Emily?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to your Endangered Species Day activities today. I'm pleased to introduce you to one of our endangered marine species, the white abalone, which is a marine snail known for its beautiful shell, and in particular, the mother of pearl on the inside of its shell. I hope you can see here. So NOAA Fisheries is responsible for conserving 165 marine and anadromous species. Anadromous species are species that spend some portion of their lives in the ocean and or bays and or rivers. Of those species, we've got 85 endangered species under the U.S. Endangered Species Act and 80 threatened species under the Federal Endangered Species Act. 38 of the species are marine mammals, which includes seals and whales. We've got 25 species of marine sea turtles, 73 species of fish, 28 species of coral and abalone, and 1 marine plant. So that's a lot of species for NOAA to manage. Not as many as U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but it's still a lot. And NOAA has shortened the list to include the most endangered species for which we can take actions right now and hopefully prevent their extinction. So those are the species you're seeing in front of you. And this group is known as our species in the spotlight species. They include the Atlantic salmon, Central Coast coho salmon, Cook Inlet beluga whales, Hawaiian monk seals, Pacific leatherback sea turtles, North Atlantic right whales, Sacramento River winter run Chinook salmon, southern resident killer whales, and the white abalone, which I'll be spending the rest of my talk speaking about today. So white abalone are animals in the kingdom Animalia. They are critically endangered. They belong to the phylum Mollusca, which are the soft, unsegmented bodied animals that are usually enclosed in a hard outer shell that's made of calcium carbonate. Here's the shell again. They're in the subphylum Invertebrata, which means that they have no backbones. They're in the class Gastropoda, which means stomach foot and includes snails, slugs, and whelks. They are in the order Archaeogastropoda, which are the marine snails, and in the family Haliotidae, which only includes the abalones. There's only one genus, Haliotis, and that includes approximately 56 species. And the word Haliotis actually means sea ear, which maybe is not hard to imagine if I do this. They actually look like sea ears. The species name Sorenseni comes from the fact that the first known shell specimen was submitted by a naturalist by the last name of Sorensen. Okay, so where does white abalone live? Well, white abalone, shown here by this cute little mugshot on the right-hand side, is one of the species on the west coast of North America, and it's shown by this white line extending from the central part of California in the United States all the way down to the central part of Baja California, Mexico. White abalone's cousins are also shown here on this list. There are 6 other species that share the coast, and their ranges are pictured by the color line that's listed next to their name. So you can see that pinto or threaded abalone occur all the way from southeastern Alaska down to central Baja California, Mexico. Now, there are 2 species of abalone that are listed on our federal endangered species list. Both are listed as endangered, and that's the black abalone that was listed in 2009 and the white abalone listed in 2001. All of these species are protected by the state of California, and a lot of the other states and Canada protect abalone along our coast. So before telling you about all of the really cool things we're doing to save this species, I wanted to highlight for you why they're important and also how they became at risk of extinction. So first of all, going back in history, I'd like to highlight their cultural importance for you. Abalone were a really critical food and trade resource for the native people that lived in Southern California. And that's really exhibited by this pile of shells on one of our California Channel Islands known as a shell pile or midden. And this pile of shells basically consists of thousands of years of accumulated shells that our Native American tribes used for food and for trade while they lived on the islands. Now, this map on the right-hand side shows you how far to the east, if you follow any of these black arrows to the east, how far the coastal tribes traded these shells for other goods. They went all the way to Texas to trade their abalone shells for other valuable things that they would bring back to the coast. Now, moving into the modern era, abalone were also very well liked by immigrants to the West Coast who loved to eat abalone and loved their taste. In fact, they enjoyed eating them so much that it developed into a very lucrative fishery, and it brought in a lot of thriving economy to the West Coast states. But unfortunately, as people and scuba divers in particular became better and better at fishing for abalone, mostly because the technologies that allowed divers to stay underwater longer and go deeper were advancing, they took abalone sort of indiscriminately from the seafloor without knowing much about their biology or how to manage the fishery. And this led to their overexploitation. And eventually they became so rare that we listed them as endangered in 2001 because there weren't enough males and females on the bottom of the seafloor anymore so that they could reproduce successfully. Now, the third reason why abalone are very important is because of their ecological contributions to the temperate kelp forest. Here you see a white abalone cruising around on a small patch of kelp forest floor, and it's sharing the rock with a couple of other friends. But these abalone are sort of like the vegetarian vacuum cleaners of the kelp forest floor. You'll see them catching these pieces of kelp that are floating by, and they're really simple in design. They haven't changed much in about 70 million years or so. They have a hard outer shell that protects their muscular foot and all of their organs, and they have these little tentacles that stick out from the rim of their shell, and those tentacles are used to sense their environment. You'll also notice that they have holes in their shells, and those holes are used to breathe, excrete waste through, and also release their reproductive cells or gametes through. So abalone are pretty nifty in their design. They also help promote kelp forest diversity because they don't eat the entire kelp plant, and they move very slowly over the bottom of the ocean floor, only eating small amounts of kelp and clearing small areas. This allows new plants to take root and grow, and it maintains kelp forest resilience in that way. So now on to what we are doing to help bring back this really cool critter to the kelp forest. The first thing we're doing is we're trying to bring adult abalone into a laboratory and spawn them in captivity and raise them up to a size that we can then put them back into their natural environment. So this slide takes you through 6 steps, moving in a clockwise fashion, about what a typical day of spawning and rearing looks like in the laboratory. We first weigh and measure all of our adult abalone. Then we place them in their little separate buckets and expose them to a cocktail of cues that hopefully gets them ready to spawn. If we're lucky, a couple of hours later, we wind up with a female, in this case, who has just released her eggs, shown by this brown, greenish hue in the bottom of the beaker. We then fertilize those eggs, and hopefully, roughly 50 days later, we wind up with a little baby abalone that's only about 1/2 millimeter in size. And then almost a year later, we wind up with an abalone that's ready to be placed out in nature. Our program in the laboratory has become more and more successful over time. Over here on the y-axis of this graph, you'll see the number of 1-year-old white abalone that we've produced in captivity, plotted against the year. And as you can see, we've become more and more successful over time, which we're really proud of. And in the background, you can see a really cool photograph of a female abalone releasing eggs from one of her respiratory pores. Another thing that we are doing is we are monitoring our white abalone in the wild and also identifying habitats that would be very good for putting our baby abalone that we're raising in captivity back into. And we do this using a remotely operated vehicle in deep waters greater than 100 feet deep. And in shallow waters, we use self-contained underwater breathing apparatus, or scuba, to find abalone, and also to deploy these really neat instruments called time-lapse cameras, which help us keep an eye on our wild abalone and give us a clue as to how they're behaving in their natural environment and what kinds of habitat characteristics they need to survive well. So I'll give you a minute to stare at this slide and try to find the white abalone. And if you can't find it, here's your clue. There it is. They're very cryptic. Another thing that we do when we monitor our wild populations is we collect genetic samples from them. And in this video, you'll see an underwater scientist taking a little clip of tissue from one of the tentacles coming out from the bottom of this white abalone shell. That tissue is going to go back to a genetic laboratory where one of our geneticists can determine what the wild level of genetic diversity is. We can also catalog the genetics of this particular individual and know whether it produces any babies in the future. We can also positively identify this animal to be a white abalone because sometimes it's hard to tell the difference among the species. And finally, when our baby abalone get to be of large enough size, we get to put them back into the ocean, which is a really exciting time for us. On the day of outplanting, we take our individually tagged white abalone down into the water in little bags, and our divers hand place those individually tagged abalone into a little outplanting module, or you could think of it as a little condominium that provides a safe place for our abalone to stay for 4 weeks. The mesh on the outer part of this cage protects them from predators and allows them to get used to their new environment. We also have to give them food while they're in their little outplanting modules, and so we stuff kelp in the module, and then our divers secure the module, and we deem the outplanting a success. About 4 weeks later, our divers come back to these modules and we tip up the top of the module to allow our little baby abalone to crawl out on their own through the crack that we create in the space between the top of the module and the natural reef. So far, we have had 4 successful white abalone outplanting efforts from 2019 to 2021, and we are about to embark on our 5th white abalone outplanting next week. So we're really excited about that. We've outplanted over 6,000 baby white abalone to date, and our time-lapse cameras that we've deployed on the bottom of the ocean have helped us to monitor not only how the community responds to us putting a large number of white abalone onto the reef, but also how our modules are performing, and also what happens to our white abalone over time. Here you can see a picture of a white abalone that's thriving on natural rock 1 year after the date that it was outplanted, and it still actually has an individual tag on its shell so that we can measure it and enter that information into our database. Speaking of our database, we've also spent a lot of time developing a shared database so that we can share information with you, just like we're doing today, and with our partners. And speaking of partners, the last piece of our recovery program for white abalone is to partner with great organizations across the West Coast, some of whom are shown in these photographs, a lot of whom are fabulous women who have been Girl Scouts at some point in their past. And we just love doing this because it helps us basically tell the story of this program through our partners to lots of different groups and different people. And in large part, our program is a success to date because of the partners who we work with. And just to tell you a little bit about me, in case you were wondering, I am a former Brownie and Girl Scout and the daughter of a former Girl Scout troop leader. I have an undergraduate degree in biology and a PhD in ecology and evolution. My early inspirations came from my summers spent at the New Jersey shore and an undergraduate experience I had at the Shoals Marine Laboratory. I'm currently a biologist at the NOAA West Coast Protected Resources Division in Long Beach, California, and I'm currently inspired by our many amazing partners and also by the hope that the work I do can ensure that future generations enjoy healthy and productive oceans. My happiest moments are spent outdoors with my family. And if you're wondering what you can do to help white abalone, the previous things that were mentioned by our fish and wildlife speakers are all things that you can do to help keep our oceans clean with respect to staying away from bottled waters, staying away from pesticides and other pollutants that are used on land. And also, in the case of abalone, reporting any kind of suspicious activities that you see happening in the ocean to various hotlines that exist at NOAA are a good way to help our endangered marine species. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So we do have a little bit of time for questions, and I have a boatload of questions about the abalone in the Q&A here. If anyone has more questions, feel free to write them in the Q&A section. One of the most popular questions we've gotten is, how do the abalone move?
So they have a muscular foot underneath their shell. I actually forgot to show my little, this is my little crocheted version of an abalone. And if I turn it over for you, this is actually the foot of the abalone. It's the part of the abalone that people like to eat. And it's very muscular, and it uses that muscle to move across the substrate.
You actually brought up another point that I've seen in a few questions, not just in your presentation, but in all of our presentations. How can we be sure when we're eating seafood, for instance, that we are eating animals that are not endangered and that we're making responsible choices?
That is a great question. So the Monterey Bay Aquarium and lots of aquaria around the country, I'm sure the Baltimore Aquarium has a seafood safe list. If you go to one of their websites, they even have these cool little pocket-sized bookmarks that you can carry with you. And it tells you which species that you might typically see on a restaurant menu are safe to eat, both from a human health perspective, but also from a fisheries perspective and an endangered species perspective. So I encourage you to check out Seafood Safe. They should have a website.
As a biologist, what do you do in your job?
Well, a lot of those photographs that you saw of people working underwater and on boats included me on the team. So I spend a portion of my time out in the field, in kelp forests and beside kelp forests, working in what's called the intertidal zone. But I also spend a lot of time at my desk writing recovery plans, coordinating with all of our partners, and analyzing data. So I spend probably equal portions of my time at a desk writing, working with data, analyzing data, and also collecting data underwater.
Not too bad to be able to scuba dive at work. Sounds pretty fun. I'll do one final question because it is 6:59 here Eastern time. We have several people who want to know, at what depth does the white abalone usually live?
Oh, that's a great question. So historically, we think white abalone were the species that occurred over the broadest depth range, from as shallow as 15 feet to as deep as over 200 feet. But what happened during the course of the fishery was that all of those abalone in shallower waters were fished out. And so now our white abalone that we find are typically in waters greater than about 55 feet, all the way down to just over 200 feet.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for all this information and for your answers to these questions. And thank you, girls, for another set of great questions. You've had a lot of really smart insights today. We are just about ready to finish up here today, but I want to just share one last thing very quickly. so that everyone is prepared to finish their endangered species patch. If I can share my screen again, there we go. A lot of you were asking in the chat, okay, well, now that I know all of these things about endangered species, what can I do to help? And of course, Kim and Michelle and Melissa gave us a lot of great ideas, but I wanted to share just a few more from our friends at the Endangered Species Coalition. Learning about endangered species is obviously important because you can't do anything if you don't know about them. Visiting your local wildlife refuges, parks, or other open spaces to connect with nature and maybe get to meet some rangers and talk to them about the work they do. You can make your home wildlife friendly, for instance, by keeping your cats indoors to protect birds and other small animals like rodents, like the mouse, and by planting a native garden and not using pesticides that can hurt our waterways with runoff or hurt insects. So ditching herbicides and pesticides, slowing down when driving, or asking your parents and caregivers to slow down to avoid hitting any animals on the road. Of course, we love recycling. We love using sustainable products, reducing and reusing. Never, ever purchasing products made from threatened or endangered species like medicines or foods. And then be kind to animals and protect their habitats. So just as a reminder, you have now finished steps 1 and 2 of the Endangered Species Patch Program. Daisies, brownies, and juniors, you just have step 3 left to do. Cadets, seniors, and ambassadors, 3, 4, and 5. But that is all we have for you this evening. It is now 7 Eastern time, which is the end of our program. This has been recorded and I will be posting it sometime in the next 2 weeks. I will email all attendees a link to access the recording if you want to look at it again or share it with your other Girl Scout sisters. So thank you all so much for coming this evening. It was great to hear from our amazing friends at FWS and NOAA. I thank you all for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. And I hope you all get out there and take action for endangered species next Friday for Endangered Species Day. Good night, everyone.